new vice chair. Just in case of an emergency, there are no planned fire drills this evening. If you hear the alarm, please treat it as a real fire. Don't run towards the fire is the best advice I can give you. The nearest escape route is by the stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber, so out there and left. Oh, the public gallery is the same, but no one here. Exit by the door at the back of the building and walk, do not run, across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. The lifts cannot be used in the event of emergency, and please do not re-enter the building until you're advised it is safe to do so by a member of staff. So, first of all, minutes. Do we agree that the previous minutes were an accurate representation of the last meeting? Yeah, brilliant. That's agreed. Quickly initial and sign these.
One thing, that Chairman, we got apologies from Rob Sanders, and also I believe Councillor Rodney Down is on his way.
Yes, indeed. So I'll just quickly run through the agenda with some rough timings. We'll get through the minutes and declarations in about 3 minutes. Have we got any public questions today?
None.
That saves us a little bit of time. 5 minutes on progress and outcomes. I will have 20 minutes for item 5, 10 for item 6 because it's more information. I'm assuming, and please feel free. These are important items, so don't worry if we overrun. I'm not going to insist that we keep to them. Strictly 20 minutes for item 7, 20 for item 8, again 20 minutes for item 9, 5 minutes of the work plan, and then we'll finish off with any members' questions. So it's quite a busy agenda. So if we crack on, any declarations of interest, Stephen?
I'm the Governor, Holy Cross Catholic Primary School and Queen's Gate Foundation Primary School.
Any other declarations of interest? I would declare I used to be a foster carer, just in case that makes any difference to the fostering report. Excellent, thank you very much. No public questions. Progress on outcomes and recommendations from the previous meetings. We seem to be progressing most things pretty well. The only thing, and Stuart quite rightly reminds us of every time, is COVID put paid to us visiting the MASH, which I think would be a good idea if we can organise. So if we sort of reliven that, Paul, if we could, that'd be good. Anything else anybody spotted or feels that isn't progressing that we need to? Councillor Andre.
Sorry, Chair. With regard to the visit to MASH, can I ask that that be extended to all members and not just members of this committee?
Absolutely, good
Thank
idea.
you.
So, and I'm guessing this is either Brian or not Brian. Item 5, school governor recruitment and retention. Oh.
Oh, sorry, I failed at the first hurdle. Yes, can I introduce you to Di Hiscock, who's the head of government services over here, who's going to take 10 minutes just to pull out the key highlights from the report, and is very happy to take any questions.
Welcome, Diane. Please carry on.
Okay, so thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about governance and thank you, and government services and importantly governor vacancies have on the Isle of Wight. For those of you that don't know me, as Brian said, I'm Di Hiscock. I work for Government Services and I work in close partnership with colleagues from Hampshire Government Services to provide information, support, advice and guidance to governing boards on the island. Those of you that are or have been governors will be aware that governance is a voluntary role. It can be quite demanding and time consuming, but it does have its benefits and can be quite rewarding with regard to one's own personal development and developing business skills, management skills and so on. And that feel that you're giving something back to the community. So in maintained schools, which we work with mostly, the school governance constitution regulations required that all governing bodies reconstituted by 2014, and this led to an overall reduction in governing bodies, in governors nationally, in the numbers of governors. For the Isle of Wight, we currently have around 91 vacancies, and that is about 21% of our overall governor population on the island. That has reduced more recently from 25%, which we were running at for quite a long time, for a number of years. Actually, we had 25% vacancies. And I think the reduction was partly due to the fact that we introduced the virtual training and online meetings so that governors could attend meetings more easily and could carry out some of their responsibilities remotely. So I'm inclined to think that now we're returning more to face-to-face meetings, and schools and governors are required to be in schools more often, we may see an increase in vacancies again, but only time will tell. Of those 91 vacancies, we've got 39 co-opted governor vacancies, and you'll have seen from the paper that co-opted governors are appointed by the governing bodies. They're identified and appointed by the governing bodies. We have 18 foundation governor vacancies. Foundation governors are in church schools and they're appointed by the diocese. We've got 14 parent governor vacancies who are elected by the parent communities, but if no nominees come forward for a parent governor vacancy, the governing body can identify a suitable person and make that appointment. And LA governors, we have 10 LA governor vacancies. So that means there are 10 governing bodies on the island who don't have an LA governor, because every governing body can only have one LA governor. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. We don't hold academy data, but we do have a good relationship with academies and good communication with them, mostly through their cards to governors. So we do talk to them about recruitment, but we don't play a part in their recruitment activities. So with the introduction of the school governance constitution regulations, schools were expected to be more proactive in how they go about appointing governors. It's up to them to identify the people that they required through carrying out regular skills audits and self-assessment activities, and they would use the information that came out of those to inform their recruitment processes. The local authority doesn't appoint governors, but we do monitor vacancies and we do provide support to help schools with their governor recruitment activities. So the way we do that is that we run recruitment campaigns in partnership and in collaboration with Hampshire Governor Services to try, and we've done this more recently, to encourage local businesses and community groups to promote governance as a valuable voluntary opportunity, although the governance isn't widely known as a good volunteering opportunity, and I think this is why we don't get so many people coming forward, because they don't understand what's involved or what's expected of them, and they tend to steer clear of it or shy away from it. We run workshops to try and support governing bodies to put together robust recruitment programs and try and support them in their recruitment and retention of governors. We have a good induction program which they can send their new governors on, and we provide an annual training program to help with the development of governors and to retain good governors who are able to develop more into the role. We provide a recruitment guidance document which governors are able to adopt or adapt to suit their needs, and they can use that to help with their processes. We also signpost them to national organisations such as Governors for Schools and Inspiring Governance, where they can register all their vacancies and in the hope of being matched with suitable people who have expressed an interest in governance. And I think this is where we've managed to pick up a few additional governors more recently, because there's been that option for remote governance. So they've been able to go wider afield to recruit. And we do have some governors on the island who actually live on the mainland, even as far as Wales. And then schools that subscribe to Isle of Wight Governor Services also have access to the Hampshire Governor Services website, which provides a wealth of information and resources which schools can use to support their recruitment, development and retention of governors. What we would ask is that elected members support their local schools by responding positively as they can to requests received by clerks to governors for nominations to fill those LA Governor vacancies and actually support them with any vacancies that they may have in trying to identify people who might be suitable to become school governors or to volunteer and come forward. Just for your information, anyone can be an LA governor. It doesn't have to be a councillor, it doesn't have to be an employee of the local authority or have any connection with the local authority in any way. The only people who can't be LA governors are members who people who are employed to work at the school. So if at any time you're aware of anyone through your business and community networks who might be interested or suitable to be a governor, it's worth promoting the opportunities through there. Like I said, that if you're able to promote governance as a whole through your business and community networks, that would be most helpful. The paper that I sent through also showed you how the roles and responsibilities of governors have increased in more recent years. It is a demanding role. It does take time and commitment, but it's also beneficial in that the management skills that a governor can develop through being a governor and through training and development and through the experience that they have being a governor, the sort of situations that they might have to deal with, is helpful. The management skills are often transferable into other areas of work. And that so in that way they can be beneficial to the employer of whoever the employer is of that person. It also helps to build a person's personal development and to build on their confidence. So those are ways in which a person can benefit from being a governor. And there's also the can't think of the word. The feel that they're giving something back to the community and that they're contributing to providing a excellent educational opportunities for all children across the island. So what next? We will continue to update the recruitment guidance so that governing bodies can review and adopt their processes annually. We're working with Hampshire to provide a number of places on workshops for chairs and aspiring chairs to join Hampshire governors from Hampshire schools, and those workshops include input on recruitment and retention, building the team, coaching, developing the individual governors, and what's the other thing? Oh, the constitution of governing bodies, so how the governors are made up and how they might use the constitution to change the number of vacancies that they have. We'll ask chairs to share their good news stories through the termly network meetings that we hold in the hope that we can use some of those to promote governance and to spread the word around positive attitude towards governance. And then we'll work in collaboration with Hampshire Governor Services on the forthcoming media campaign in the hope that we can raise awareness of governance and the opportunities that are available. Oh yes, Governor Hub is it's a database that we use to maintain governing body memberships. So the clerk is the administrator on Governor Hub, and all governors have access to that so that they can maintain their own information records. That's where they can find training and where they can book training opportunities. And there's also quite a lot of information that they can access through Governor Hub as well. So every governor has access to Governor Hub. And as I said, every governor of schools that subscribe to our service also has access to the Hampshire Governor Services website.
Excellent, thank you, Diane. That was very, very comprehensive report. Thank you very much. I will open up to questions. Any questions for Diane? Councillor Ellis.
Thanks, Di. I can vouch for sort of everything that Di's saying, having worked with Di very closely, very helpful to me. And governance definitely is a really good opportunity. I was glad to hear that you mentioned a forthcoming media campaign. That was going to be my question. It was around comms, because people don't know. People don't know. We do need to get that message out there. So I'd be interested to know a little bit more about when and sort of that's likely to come along, because it's nice to get those vacancies filled. We can all spread the word, but it's always useful if there's something that we can share, you know, a nice PDF we can put on our social media pages, that kind of thing. So it's just about how you can help us to help you to get the information out there.
We're in the initial stages at the moment, so we've just had those initial conversations. So what we'll be doing is I'll work closely with colleagues in Hampshire Governor Services. We'll put together a timescale and look at the various ways that we can get the message out through. So when we've done the recruitment campaigns in the past, we've used the council social media, council advertising. We've used bus stop advertising, so in the bus
Stood in the
shelters.
precinct down the road with leaflets, we've done
Yeah.
all sorts.
Yeah, we've put leaflets out to libraries. We've given schools leaflets to send out. We've used Isle of Wight radio and all those sort of the county press. We've put adverts in the county press and so on. So it will be along those lines, but I think we're going to be a bit more intensive this time. So, and it will be more. Whereas we've done separate campaigns in the past, this will be more of a joint one for Hampshire and Isle of Wight.
Any further questions? Councillor Hendry, and then Councillor Lee.
Really nice to put a face to a name.
We
I've
often
been
talk,
getting
don't
emails
we?
from Di for the last 5 years. I suppose the question I have is, we have all these spaces for governors. Is it quite a few schools are missing quite a few governors, and some schools are completely full, or is it kind of evenly spread between them, really?
It tends to move around. So we've got a few schools who are absolutely desperate for governors. We've got a couple of schools that don't have any vacancies at all. And it tends to fluctuate. So one minute you'll think one school is quite full of governors, and all of a sudden something happens, or there's several governors have come to the end of their term of office at the same time and have decided not to continue. There's all sorts of reasons that governors don't go on, and often when you get a group of governors ending at around the same time, it's usually because they've all got different reasons, but it just happens at the wrong time, and then you end up with a governing body that is almost not dysfunctional, but there is the least number of governors that governing bodies are supposed to be able to function with is 7, and we have a couple that are down to 6, and those are the ones we'd be a little bit worried about. Whereas the majority of governing bodies have 1 or 2 vacancies at some time.
Thank you, Diane. Because just thinking about how we can actually manage recruitment, is there a single place where somebody can go and see vacancies, either online or elsewhere?
That you can on the Governors for Schools and Inspiring Governance website. So normally the clerk would register the vacancies on there, and they show what vacancies are available, or they would match you to a school that is close by. Generally, with regard to vacancies, they'll be shown on the school website. So every school website will publish its governing body information and membership information, and it will show whether it has vacancies or not. We don't specifically publish them on the Isle of Wight Council website, because it's up to the schools to be proactive and to do that, and to go out there and seek their governors. But we do, on the council website, we have an option for people to make an inquiry, and then we would try and match them to a school that would be suitable for their experience and their background.
Any further questions? Councillor Andre.
If I could just add to that, part of the rationale, and thanks to Di for an extremely comprehensive paper, part of the rationale of bringing this report to this committee is that we were hoping that perhaps a recommendation for a media campaign could be put forward by this committee.
Sorry, we've got Rodney serenading us. So don't worry. Don't worry, mate. Don't worry. Don't worry. Worse things happen. If you'd like to repeat. Don't worry. Would you like to repeat the last bit, Councillor?
Yes, I was just saying that thanks to Di for a very comprehensive report, and part of the rationale of bringing this report to this committee is to perhaps for the to bring it more into the public domain, but perhaps for this committee to make a recommendation to launch a media campaign on top of that, and we very much like the committee's input in that, I'm sure.
I was just going to ask how else can we help as a committee, and Paul has just suggested that when the social media campaign goes live, we could have a link for all members for us to be part of circulating that as well. I think that we could take that responsibility on.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that comes to mind that we could do as a committee to help with?
I think as a committee and as councillors overall, it's about spreading the word. It's about raising that awareness of governance, encouraging people to just find out a bit more about it, so that we can get those interested parties to come forward. I think the more people know, the more they will be inclined to want to be involved, because they want good education for their children.
Fair enough. Brian.
I just wanted to say, as members, you have fantastic inroads into the community and the business links as well. That the more arms you can softly twist and ask them to get in touch with Di or myself, we'll always put them in touch with schools. But you've got fantastic networks you can draw on. It is still an incredibly rewarding job to be a governor. And speaking as an ex-head, I've got to tell you, there were times where I don't think I could have survived and done half the job I did without the governing body I had. It's that subtle bit of knowing when to put your arm around somebody to put in place that nurture, when to ask the challenging question. You've got to be able to read people really well. And I think lots of heads on the island would say they're only doing the job they're doing because the way the governing body are with them. So the more people you can find that are emotionally intuitive, but also bring other skills to bear, it would be really helpful.
That's a very good point. Any further comments before we move? No, thanks again, Di. Feel free to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you don't wish to, we won't think anything any less of you. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, UK settlement scheme for refugees, which I assume is you, Brian.
So, as people around this table are probably aware, several host families on the Isle of Wight have come forward to offer their homes to families coming from Ukraine. So it allows immediate and extended family members of British nationals, people settled in the UK and other residents to come to the country. And at that point, they're granted a visa that will last for up to 3 years, which provides some certainty about their future in the country. So it was launched on the 14th of March. We didn't really have a lot of notice, so we had to respond to quite a dynamic and evolving situation. And I have to say, having been really involved with the setting up of the scheme on the island and working across council, there's been some excellent working and support across the council to support this scheme. And we've had some teething problems along the way, but actually the process appears to be embedding and working really well. So as I said, it was launched on the 14th of March. Locally, Children's Services are part of a cross-council coordinated partnership, working really closely with Community Action Isle of Wight and others to organise, deliver and support the scheme. As I said, apart from the initial challenges and some of the teething problems, it's working really well. So how the process works, the council received notification of host applications through a data portal. Then they ring the children's reception team and the multi-agency safeguarding hub in Hampshire, who log all those details and then put them through to social work teams on the island to undertake the assessment work and the initial visits. So what we ascertained very quickly was the key was good communications, having a really good single point of contact and really swift triaging of the work in CRT and MASH. So our role as social workers and family support workers is to undertake host and household checks at the home. There were some challenges around that because we didn't feel that we were initially equipped to undertake household checks. We can do very basic suitability checks of properties, but we weren't going to go in and check gas certificates and things like that. And that's where housing have been excellent. And they've come in and they undertake joint visits with us just to sign off those safety elements of the visit. We undertake ID checks of the host family members, and we do DBS checks, including children over 16 who are living in the host's home. Again, that's been a fairly seamless process and seems to be working really well. Once the Ukraine family have arrived, we then undertake a second follow-up visit, and we signpost them to community action, early help in the family centres, and we link them into schools, local GPs and any other support that might be beneficial to them. So far, we've not identified any real safeguarding issues. We have had one family that we had to rematch because it didn't work when the Ukraine family got here. But other than that, we've got 93 hosts that we're currently checking. So the numbers that I submitted a couple of weeks ago, they're out of date now, because I think the number of sponsors we've got now is, I'm sure it's 93, and the age ranges of the children, the 0 to 4 years has grown, and our highest cohort is the 5 to 16, which is the school age children. And that's where the work of Brian's teams and Jade Kennett has been excellent. It's been a fairly seamless process to get those children into local schools, which was really good work. So that's our Ukraine scheme. It's a work in progress. We're learning on the job effectively. We're adapting and tweaking the process as we go along. And I think one of the best things that's come out of it is the way that we're all working collaboratively and the way that we reconcile the information and the data we're getting. We're triangulating it to make sure that no families slip through the net. So that's the Ukraine resettlement scheme. So I'm just going to talk you through our duties to our unaccompanied asylum seeking children. So the Isle of Wight's part of the mandated transfer scheme, which means that we have no choice but to take unaccompanied asylum seeking children, along with all the other local authorities in the country. So we don't need to accept children where the cohort already makes up 0.07 of the general child population. Because the population here is quite small, for us that equates to 17 children under the age of 18. So we currently have 17 unaccompanied asylum seeking children. 7 are supported by the Care Leavers Service. All of the unaccompanied children open to the Isle of Wight are male, and they're looked after. They have looked after child status, and they're accommodated under Section 20 of the Children Act, and they have an allocated social worker. So I'm not going to read through the countries of origin. As you can see, it's quite diverse. Most of our children have travelled to the UK by small boats from Calais, having experienced significant trauma in their countries of origin. So, you know, often when they arrive, it takes us a while to learn their story. There's often a language barrier. The trauma prevents them talking about their experiences. And it takes us a while to kind of pick up their story and understand what they've been through. So they receive the same statutory services as all looked after children that we have responsibility for. And we're really very keen and very hot on making sure they have the relevant health assessments, the same as other children, including opticians, dental, etc. And we work really hard to make sure any unmet health needs are addressed as a matter of urgency. Most of the children are Muslim that we're currently working with, and obviously we want to meet their cultural and religious needs. So we always try to make sure they have a copy of the Quran, a prayer mat, and that their religious practice is respected, linking them into local mosques, etc. One of the key parts of the work that we have to do is to secure their status in this country. So we need to make sure they have access to really good legal advice so that they can get leave to remain. So we've got 17 children, all at various different stages of that process. I don't think we've had any challenges. Debbie might be able to help us because she manages that part of the service. We get some really good solicitors who support these children in the way that they should, so that works well. So we made a difficult decision really about our unaccompanied asylum seeking children. In order to meet their cultural, ethnic and religious needs in a better way, we made a decision to place them in the London area, and we've got quite a few children placed in Croydon. It seems to work. They took a large number of unaccompanied children. There's some really good agencies there who work with these children and young people, and it seems to really work. They have that network of support that they might not necessarily get on the island. So we also try to place them with carers who have similar ethnic backgrounds as well. So although they live in London, they have exactly the same services they would have on the Isle of Wight. We visit them the same amount, you know, the same visiting frequency, and they have the same support and the same rights as our looked after children here. And that's it.
Thank you, Kim. Any questions for Kim? Councillor Dan.
Well, thank you, Chair. You spoke about language barriers. Do you employ many interpreters?
Yes, we do. We have to be
Yes.
able to really understand a child's journey and their experiences. We have to use local interpreters, and that's the benefits of having children placed somewhere like Croydon, which is vastly multicultural. It's much easier to access that sort of resource. So yes, we would always use an interpreter.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Would you say that, you know, put them in Croydon and that it's more their sort of culture as well, and they're more familiar to that?
I would say so, yes. I don't know Croydon particularly well myself, but I know it's more diverse than the Isle of Wight, and they've recruited specific carers for children who come from those cultures, which we haven't been able to do on the Isle of Wight. So there's a lot of thinking put into that decision to place them up there.
Any further questions? Councillor Lee.
Thank you. When was that decision made?
Oh, just trying to think. Quite a long time ago. I can't even remember when we had our first unaccompanied asylum seeking child. Debbie might be able to help.
I think originally it was made some years ago, but it's something that we continually look at. So when we get new children from that national transfer scheme, we look at placements that are available to them. We have fostering agencies that we work with in the London area. We make sure that we can get a good match. We've got schools that we work with, etc., that we work with on a regular basis. And some of the children know each other, and there's a football team that some of them belong to. So there's lots of opportunities really for them to mix with other children that speak the same language as them, etc. We have social workers, as Kim said, that visit really regularly, so we tend to use the same social workers for those children, so that they're in London regularly. They can visit each other's children if one of them is struggling a little bit. We use Bernardo's in that area as well to support young people. So we've got, there's a good network there. But if we felt that it was more appropriate to place a particular child on the Isle of Wight, we would.
I think it's worth saying as well, a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, we brought some of the unaccompanied asylum seeking children who were living in London to the island so they could see, you know, where their social workers lived and worked. And we felt it would provide some context for them, and it went really well. I think it's something we're hoping to do again.
That's good. Yeah. Councillor Hendry.
I know Croydon fairly well. I lived there for 27 years. But Croydon has Luna House, which is the immigration centre for the UK. So it does make sense. There will be a lot of other communities for them to be with.
Thank you, Kim. There's obviously a lot of hard work going into that. I'm guessing that it made it look very simple. And I'm guessing it hasn't been at all. And thank you for what you've done. All I would say is it is great work, but is there anything you see as issues coming down the line that we need to be aware of at the moment at all?
I think the only only thing it's worth saying, and I was going to come on to it when I talked about my performance report, is we're operating in a difficult context at the moment with increased demand into the service, with staffing vacancies at a really high rate. But we're continuing to do the work that we need to do, and we're doing it really well. But I don't know how sustainable that is for a long time, and I can come on to talk about that when I do the presentation around some of the ideas we've got about improving recruitment, for example.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that is going to be a concern that probably underlines quite a lot of what we'll talk about later. Any other questions before we move on? Right.
Just make the point about you go back to the first part of the report on the Ukrainian families, because I really would like to pay tribute to the island schools for the way they've rolled out the welcome mat. We have to provide statistics back to we had to provide statistics back to the DFE recently, and the target they had was how many children have you managed to place within 15 days? And the answer was all of them. And I gather we were about the only local authority that managed that kind of performance, and it's been due to schools rolling out a welcome mat. We've done all sorts of work in that. You don't just admit children from Ukraine. We've looked at the Ukrainian national curriculum, matched it across to English national curriculum. Really interesting to go and look at some of the kind of subjects and the way that they're taught in Ukraine. System's quite different. They don't leave school till they're 17. They start school later. So there's been some interesting bits around that. Hampshire host a service called the Ethnic Minority Traveller Achievement Service. We've made that available to island schools as well, and they've got something like access to 70 different languages, and they're able again to support schools in those initial few weeks during the induction. We've also managed to get alongside a charity that's doing some work on healing classrooms, because some of these children have been through some quite traumatic events as well, and we're looking at how we create healing classrooms so that they can have their social emotional needs met as well. So it's not just a couple of stats on a piece of paper. This is some really detailed work that schools have been engaged with. It's been good work.
That's good. That's good to hear. We should celebrate that success. So well done to all those involved. Thank you. Moving on to item number 7, fostering annual report.
Hi. Oh, can you hear me? That better. So I should introduce myself. I'm Debbie Price. I'm the service manager for children in care. So that means I am the service manager for fostering, adoption, children in care, care leavers and house. So I'm here today with the fostering and adoption report. So first, the fostering report. During 21-22, the service successfully recruited 6 general fostering households. There were 98 registered and approved foster care households in the Isle of Wight, and there is a target to recruit 10 fostering households in the next year. The number of foster carers needs to considerably increase and this is planned to be delivered in an improved offer to foster carers and targeting of prospective foster carers through the delivery of a modernising placements programme, which is something that we're currently working on to deliver in the future. So in terms of the work that's been done over the last year, we've continued our marketing activities that have been virtual drop-ins. We've also moved towards some more participation activities in the community. You will have hopefully seen that on local media via press releases. There have been good news stories. Councillor Andre and one of our foster carers were on the radio. So a range of activities have taken place over the last year. The service has also taken part in the South East Regional Fostering Forum's Mystery Shopper exercise. That's now in its 6th cohort, and basically all of the local authorities in the South East take part in this exercise where they ring each other to see the experience. We've done really well in that. Out of the 24 local authorities and IFAs, we have the 3rd highest average score of 7.38, so we're really proud of that. It gave us really good feedback in how our fostering service was responding to callers. In the past, the fostering service was configured so that all social workers did assessments and support, And over the last 2 years, we changed that so that it now forms of 3 hubs, which coincidentally, that restructure coincidentally was at exactly the same time as the first COVID lockdown. So we started it in April 2020. Staff began to work in new teams from home, which wasn't ideal. But that's now been going for 2 years. This is the second year, and they're doing really well. So that restructure has really helped. Although recruitment stats are lower than the previous year, that's a national trend. And we think that that's influenced by the higher cost of living and adjustments to life post-lockdown. We saw during the first period of lockdown that we had a lot of people come forward to foster, and then they pulled out because things were just too unsettling for them. And I think that's continued. And that's what we're seeing about fostering across the country. We're seeing, though, that with the community events reopening, that we are beginning to gain attention and generating some inquiries. And one of the most positive things has been that we are becoming more efficient. So efficiency is really important. And what we're seeing is the people that are coming forward, a larger percentage of them are going through to being approved. So we're focusing on the right people. The marketing's good, and we just need to increase that. So we had 53 inquiries, 27 home visits, and 7 assessments initiated. Of those 7, 6 of them were approved. So that's really positive. The conversion rate was 9.4. The big, obviously, aim of the service is to ensure that we have foster carers available to meet the needs of Isle of Wight children. And of course, that means carers on the Isle of Wight. So we are limited in where we can look for our foster carers. But in terms of the feedback from our foster carers, it's been relatively good. The main themes of that are that foster carers want to be more involved in supporting recruitment and the service with different activities. So that's really positive. They want to have access to support and training to maximise the use of IT and engage with learning. They want to see improvements in allowances. They want to return to more face-to-face training and social events, and we're seeing more of that. They want to continue the focus on compliance and quality of reporting by social workers, and focus on recording systems and refining how current data is to be more aligned. So there are lots of areas that we're working on, both with foster carers and with our staff. The main area I want to talk to you about, what I would say is you'll see in the middle of the report, there's lots of compliance data. I don't want to go through it with you because there's quite a lot of it. What I would say is it's really positive. The timeliness of supervisions is between 193 and 100%. Household reviews similarly. So the work that this team are doing with foster carers is a really high standard. They're meeting the timeliness. They're doing the things that they should be doing well. An area that we continue to need to do a bit of work on is medicals. Obviously, that's been quite difficult through COVID, but that is improving again. And the main area that we need to work on next is the modernising placement. So they've made significant progress over the last year. The service has become more efficient, timeliness and quality of work has improved. So we're really ready now to grow our service. And whilst workers have provided a better service to foster carers, there's a need to increase the recruitment of foster carers significantly. And I'm also really aware that we've got an older cohort of foster carers. So there is also the risk that at some point or another, they're going to stop fostering. So we need to make sure that we've got the numbers of people coming through. So we'll need a programme that attracts more foster carers with an improved offer to support foster carers to provide high quality, stable care to children. What I would say is the quality of foster carers that we've got is really, really good. We just need more of them. So we'll need to be able to see children through to adulthood by supporting them to understand what's happened to them and cope with the emotion that invokes. So in order to do that, carers will need high quality training and support And we need to consider the pay difference between our foster carers' pay, local authority foster carers' pay, and that of the agency foster care. I think that concludes the report. Anyone got any questions?
Any questions? Yes, Councillor X.
Thank you, Chair. It's lovely to hear that. Thank you. You can see from the figures and other meetings I've been to, you've been at, that you're doing really well within your service. So well done for that. It's not been an easy time, and it's good to see. It's just a question around the complaints and allegations against foster carers. So there's 7 allegations, and out of those 7, 3 resigned prior to conclusion. So I just wondered, is that, I'm new to this committee, new to the role, is that sort of what you would expect to see? That are people dropping out because there's an allegation against them, and are they getting the right support to go through that process, or are they dropping out perhaps because they feel they're not getting the right support? I'd just like to know a little bit more about that, please.
Yes, I think that's something that we're working on currently. So there's a new allegations policy. I met the foster carers this morning, and it was an area that we discussed. So we're going to be doing a workshop with foster carers to really understand some of that. So what it feels like to be investigated, it's something that foster carers really worry about. So we're doing a joint workshop with staff and with foster carers, so that I've asked them to provide some case studies of people that have been part of the allegations process, so that we can really look at everybody understanding how that feels. And what we need to do is make sure that foster carers and social workers are really confident with that process, because it can feel quite uncomfortable for both sides, actually, to have to deal with what can be some quite serious allegations that are made by children that can be quite traumatised. That sometimes they're talking about things that have happened to them rather than are happening to them. We need to unpick all of that carefully and safely. And it's really important that foster carers understand why we do things in the way that we do to safeguard everybody. And sometimes during that process, people do leave, and it's about understanding. Sometimes that is because they know that what they have done is wrong, and they make the decision to leave as a result of that. Sometimes they don't agree what they've done is wrong, and they leave as a result. And sometimes they leave because the process is uncomfortable and they haven't done anything wrong at all. I think it can be any one of those things. And it's about us making sure that the process is as clear and honest as it can be, so that people don't feel that it's the process that makes them want to leave.
Councillor Lever.
Thank you. Firstly, I just want to report a really detailed report, and I really enjoy seeing in these reports evidence of us learning and adapting to that. It's really good to see. I just want to sort of delve into the recruitment data a little bit more. It's quite a high drop off from that conversion of initial inquiries to getting people over the line. Is that similar to previous years, or did you say that's a lot of that is down to COVID?
It's better than previous years.
Okay.
So what you might expect is to have a higher number of inquiries, but still the same number of assessments being completed. So what we're finding this year is that the people that are coming forward, a higher percentage of them are actually being approved. What we need to do is to generate those numbers up. And what we'd like to do is to make sure that people on the island, we're their first choice. So if people want to foster on the Isle of Wight, they want to foster for the council. And we know that that isn't always the case currently, because we know that fostering agencies are also recruiting. Well, we place children with them, they have their place, and we would prefer them to be fostering for the council, because we know that then we can offer the right support. We know our children really well. That's what we would like.
And do we reach out to the people that have inquired to understand why they might not have carried on with the process, just to better understand how we might change that?
Yes, we do. And we also sometimes go back to them a bit later to see if they're interested now. Sometimes sometimes it isn't the right time. So it is about not, you've got to be careful, haven't you? You don't want to kind of make a nuisance of yourself, but it is about going back to people and just seeing if the time has changed. Sometimes people will say to you, it's not the right time at the moment, we've got things going on. So it's a really good opportunity to send them some more information later, further down the line, or pick up the phone to say, have things changed? We're still here.
Any further questions? That's about all.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very quick one. A previous report we had at this committee a number of years ago, I recall that there was a challenge not just from agencies, but also from Portsmouth City Council. I was just wondering whether that's still the case, that there are fosterers on the Isle of Wight who would prefer to take people to Portsmouth, I believe, because the rate was better. That's still the case.
I'm aware that Portsmouth still have some foster carers on the Isle of Wight, but I would say that I think things are changing, and one of the things that we really need to work on is that it's sometimes foster carers don't want to foster local children because of the communities that they live in, etc. And it is about trying to support foster carers that works really successfully, and it is really important for children to be near to their own communities and their families, and we can support foster carers with that. And that's one of the successes that we have foster carers that have got really positive relationships with children's families, and that's really important for children. So that's something that we can really offer them, to be part of that extended family, the extension of that into their community, not just the bubble of the foster family.
Any further questions? Councillor Bell.
Chairman. Is the training, after the initial training, is it not sort of continuous top up for them? And who actually does that?
Well, I think lots of people do that. So we do some training internally. So some of our fostering team deliver training to our foster carers. We've provided some national training. They are we help them to access bespoke training. If a foster carer is particularly interested in training course, we might support them to access that in particular. If they have particular training needs as a result of the needs of the children that they're looking after, we might help them to access that. So there's a real broad spectrum of training. Some of our foster carers can access some of the training that our social workers might access. So it's really being open to them. And also now, of course, you can do e-learning as well, and virtual training, as well as classroom-based training. So foster carers are used to doing online training as well as in the classroom, which has really opened the door to the variety that we can offer.
Thank you. And I know the difference in rates paid by agency compared to local authority is an issue. I don't know what you can do about that, because agency can do what they want about that, whereas you can't. It was, having been there, it was very rewarding. I won't pretend it's easy, but I don't think either we should scare people off, because I think it is something that, if you are minded to want to do something, it is very, very rewarding. And from memory, the training is non-stop. You're dealing with a situation whereby you can never have enough support, because you want as much as you can, but you don't get support when you're a parent. So it is quite difficult. But from memory, there was a lot of training and a lot of support. So, but thank you for that, Debbie. Are you giving us the adoption report as well?
Giving one of the adoption reports. So Rachel and I are both here.
Carry on.
So in terms of the Isle of Wight adoption report, so adoption now is undertaken by the Isle of Wight team and Adopt South. So Rachel's here to represent Adopt South. All the marketing activity, inquiries, pre-stage visits, adopter assessments, etc. is done by Adopt South, including panel activity. They also do post-adoption support and the adoption information exchange, which is a huge amount of work. So Rachel's team do all of that work. But in terms of what we do on the island, we deal with step parent adoptions, we do special guardianship, and we also do the children's part of the adoption work. So we do the work in terms of understanding the children and their assessment and working with Adopt South to find them adopters. So in terms of the referrals, there's been an increase in referrals. We have there have been 6 plans of adoption made during the year. The plans is a decrease from 12 made last year, but the number of children linked has been good, and we've linked and placed 5 children with Adopt South adopters. 3 of the children currently held by the team, 2 will move to placements, and family finding is underway for the other. So in terms of finding adopters for children, Adopt South are doing really well in conjunction with our social workers. There have been no disruptions again this year. So pre-order, we've had no adoption disruption since before April 2016, so considerable time. We've achieved 14 adoption orders during the year, which is a significant increase from the 5 orders granted during the previous year. The placement orders, which is slightly lower than last year. So I guess children at different places in the adoption journey. In terms of the adoption scorecards, this is a bit of a mixed bag. So what you will note is the actual number is higher. So there's the time between children entering care and moving in with their adoptive family is something that's measured in a scorecard. Currently, for the Isle of Wight, that number is at 449 days, which is higher than the government's threshold of 426 days. But what you need to understand is there's reasons why we consider that to be a really good news story, because it relates to some children who we might not otherwise have placed for adoption. So it's taken much longer to find them adoptive families, but it's really good news that we have. And when you take that kind of performance alongside the fact that we've had no disruptions for such a long period of time, you can understand that we are continuing to, as we should do, to pursue a plan of adoption for children, although they're complex, and we are finding families for them. It's just taking that little bit longer, which makes on the scorecard looks as if we're outside of timescales. 3 of the children that were a bit longer, that was because there were a number of assessments that were completed through the court process that took a bit longer, but the actual period between the court process and us finding an adopted family was really short, because we'd used that time to search for a family and they were placed. And 2 of the children that were placed with foster carers, and they applied to adopt them. So although the children have been there for almost a couple of years, they decided to apply to adopt those children, which was much better permanency outcome for those children. But that obviously meant that took a bit longer. But that was a really good outcome. And of course, they didn't move. So they've been with that family for a long time before they were adopted. They weren't moved to that family. And that also has had a similar impact on the following scorecard. The same children, it just looks as if it's taken a bit longer. But if you look at our performance outside of those children, you'll see it's much lower than the government target. In terms of life story work, we do really well. All of the children have life storybooks, they have later life letters. And so overall, the activities remained high. The service has undergone a restructure, and it has impacted on the way that we deliver all types of the work. More work has gone across to Adopt South, but actually the quality of work within the team has remained high, and the team have worked really hard to ensure that there's a continuity of service whilst working in national and local guidelines, particularly within COVID.
Hi, I'm Rachel and I'm the head of Adopt South.
Adopt South is a partnership with the Isle of Wight in Hampshire and Portsmouth and Southampton. And we've reached the end of our 3rd year. It seems a bit hard to believe, but it's gone from strength to strength, and our partnership with all 4 local authorities. Really, it's such a positive story to tell, and the outcomes hopefully really tells with that as well. When the DFE asked us to do this, it was in mind to be able to have a real good pool of adopters, so that we have real choice for children, and also to join together for adoption support, so that we could really have great strength in being able to offer good support to adopters. And that really has happened. You know, there's been a real, it's been really exciting actually, I think, the past 3 years, and how well we've all worked together to be able to achieve what we have done. Just a few highlights about year 3, if that's okay. I've just put a few things on the executive summary. So we had over 700 inquiries, 101 approved adopters, slightly less than our years 1 and 2, but that was quite deliberate in many ways, because the profile of our children have changed little bits over those 3 years. We've had much more sibling groups come forward, be referred to us, and older children. And so we've really concentrated our recruitment on those children we have waiting, rather than the younger children, the babies, which we've had quite a pool of adopters waiting for them. And that's actually worked very well. I mean, I guess just to sort of give you an idea of the change, we've been able to find families for 37 sibling groups over the 4 local authorities, and 18 of those children have been over the age of 5, so quite a big difference, really. We've identified families for 220 children. Now, not all of those are the Isle of Wight, obviously just 11 of those were the Isle of Wight, is our smallest local authority, and 93 of those we formally linked at panel. 5 of those, as Debbie has said, were from the Isle of Wight. And I know we've spoken about scorecards being high on the Isle of Wight, or higher. They're not high, they're just slightly higher. But actually, we've got some great news stories about, as Debbie has said, about the children we have placed. I can think of one little boy that we went out actually for, struggled to find a placement for him. And we went out to a big campaign, and we found a family for him. It might have taken longer, but a couple came forward who were absolutely amazing. They've gone through the assessment process, and they're now approved, and they've got him linked. I think the adoption order has just gone through actually, Debbie, hasn't it? So it's been really, really wonderful outcome for him. And again, although nationally, with our 4 local authorities, where all the scorecards actually go together. And so although the Isle of Wight might be slightly higher, when you look at all those our 4 local authorities together, actually scorecard 1, we are under the national threshold, and it's scorecard 2, we're 2 days over, so I'm fine with that. I think we've done very well actually. When we started Adopt South, we had 39 children we couldn't place, again across the 4 local authorities, and we ended our year 3 with just 6, and none of those were from the Isle of Wight. So that's really good news that we've managed to place all those children. I think it was helpful, but just on the very first page, I just put a little bit about our 3 years. So since we started, we've identified families of 518 children. 223 of those have been hard to place. When we talk about hard to place, we mean older children, sibling groups, children with complex needs. 319 of those have been formally linked, and we've approved 339 families. We've had over 7,000 inquiries to the adoption support team, and that's gone from strength to strength as well, actually. I believe people realise now that we're there, that we are there for the 4 local authorities, and they are phoning us and getting that support that they need. Stage 1 timescales for assessment, the government give us 2 months to be able to do that, and we were under with 1.7 months. They give us 4 months for stage 2, and again, we were under for 3.7 months across the 4 local authorities. That was really good news. I've looked at how we compare to other regional adoption agencies. There are 31 altogether, and we're all now in RAAs. We're about the middle, actually, when we actually started. We've got the lowest number of children waiting, is what the data shows us. Proved the 2nd highest number of adopters, so some really good things there. With only RAA who did stage 1 and stage 2 timescales, according to what the government has asked us to do. So that's been really good. We've placed more in-house than any other RAA, and we've spent less on interagency. So out of those that we linked last year, just 4 of those we had to go outside of Adopt South. And again, none of those were from the Isle of Wight, so that was good. We placed them all locally. If I could just quickly turn, and I think it's page 14, but it won't be on yours, so I'm sorry about that.
it's just a little bit about the Isle of Wight. I did a little bit about the Isle of Wight particularly, and a little bit, we still market a course even though we are across those 4 local authorities, particularly on the island, to encourage Isle of Wight families to come forward. And I've just put a little bit there about where we actually, how we're reaching out to the Isle of Wight County Press, for example, and social media and radio as well. We've had 25 inquiries from Isle of Wight families in the last year, and 4 of those we've approved. I won't go through the children's journey because I know that Debbie has actually said that data there. But I think really very good news in the fact that we've got no children waiting. So we've placed the 5 that we have placement orders for, and we've got 1 that's about to go to linking panel of legal. Questions for me?
Thank you, Rachel. Again, very, very comprehensive report. Thank you for that. Page 74, for those of you who can't find the in our pack, who've got questions for Rachel. Who got a job? I mean, it's good news, but what are the things that keep you awake at night, Rachel? What isn't so going so well?
What keeps me awake at night? We have done very well, but you never know what's around the corner, do you? That's what keeps me awake at night, and never ever, never be satisfied with what we've done. Always want more. Always want better adoption support. Always make sure we've got the right adopters coming through, because we never know, what year 4 might bring. And I think always keep developing, being innovative, being different, keeping ahead of the game. And I think that's what taxes me, but actually also excites me. And we've got a great team working for us, but also we've got some good relationships with the local authorities, and particularly Debbie and Kim, and we work very well together.
Would you say you're struggling the same as Debbie mentioned with recruiting people for your organisation?
We haven't to the same degree. I think adoption and fostering are different. I think people come through with different motivations. I think combination of perhaps people that have got their own infertility journey and have decided after perhaps they've exhausted that fertility of their own, that they come to adoption. But also we're seeing more and more people come forward because they have a real heart for giving a child a home. They might make that choice not to have children of their own, or perhaps have one and come forward. And so I think the permanent bit of adoption and wanting a family or wanting to perhaps change a child's life permanently, I think is slightly different to adoption, to fostering rather. But important, I think, that we always try different things. I guess just to give an example, we've just employed a community and development worker to work with faith groups. So I think, there's a great resource sometimes in with people that might have that real heart to actually, look at adoption and to perhaps give a child a home that wouldn't otherwise have a family. And so again, any contacts on the Isle of Wight with faith groups, we'd love to know more. And I know she's already contacted. We've got a good, strong group over here. And I know Debbie's helped in the past as well.
All I was going to add to that, Rachel, is that we recently sent out the flyer. It was actually for fostering, but we can do the same for adoption to all members. And I've actually printed off a poster, and it's in my church. And I absolutely agree with you that that is one avenue that we can explore more.
Excellent, thank you.
And lastly, from me, has the legal process changed at all in terms of adoption of children, or has it just stayed the same?
Yes, still the same. So children's plan will start off with the Isle of Wight local authority. It will go to court for a placement order. The child will then be placed, and then that's the final bit is the adoption order, and that's the part that the child becomes totally theirs with a new birth.
Excellent. Anything else, Rachel? Councillor Outlaw.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very comprehensive report and easy to understand, which is always good, because sometimes you get some language which is not quite get if you're a layman. And there was one sentence in here which I was a bit curious about, and that's the 9 adopters sold generating £250,000. I thought that sounds a bit like human trafficking to me, but I'm sure it's not.
No, and there's a better word for it. it would be, I'm very happy to use it. So when we recruit, when I talked about those 4 that we couldn't find in-house and then we went externally to find them, I guess in many ways we then purchase them. So we buy them, we buy, adopters that are approved by other agencies because they're the right ones for us. And so when I talk about the 9 selling, those are ones we've recruited ourselves, but perhaps they're not right for our families and they choose to go to actually perhaps find a family that's better suited, a child better suited to it, a better match. And we encourage some people to as well, because nationally there's a real shortage of adopters. We've done very well, but other RAAs are really struggling to find families. And so if we can also help other children outside of our own area, that's obviously.
Thank you for reassuring us it's not child trafficking. That would be cause us quite a problem if we were approving that. Anything else for Rachel? Okay, smashing. Thank you for that. Feel free to stay for the rest of the meeting, but again, if you need to leave, we won't mind. Moving on to the most exciting part, Brian's bit. Performance and budget update. Oh no, Kim, sorry. Brian had a bit of false pretenses. 3 slides, that'll do. That's enough. Please carry on. Actually managed to do something. Our IT department has failed for the last several weeks. I'm very, very impressed. I don't know. Oh, there you go then. That's it. That's what we need to do. Carry on.
Sorry, I'm going to talk you through. Oh, yes, thank you. Talk you through some headlines from our current performance, and it will really provide some context about the rise in demand and some of the challenges I spoke about earlier. So in terms of the headlines, demand remains high across social care, not just on the Isle of Wight, but regionally and nationally. We're operating 15 to 20% higher than we were pre-pandemic, and that hasn't reduced during that time. Despite that increased demand, good performance is sustained. Isle of Wight Council have been really good in giving us some additional investment to employ additional social workers to manage the rise in demand. But again, regionally, nationally, there's a real challenge in recruitment of social workers, and I'll come on to that at the end. So despite all this and despite the pressures and working through 2 pandemics, we had really positive feedback from Ofsted in July last year. So if you look at the contacts into the service, so this is the first point of contact through the children's reception team in Hampshire. And what we've done is highlighted the 2 periods of lockdown with the grey vertical bars. So you can see the activity around those 3 bars, and you can see the increase post-lockdown. So you can see the increase in contact, particularly in Q3 and Q4. And actually in Q4 of this year, and I'll move on to the multi-agency safeguarding hub and the referrals on this slide, you will notice a steep rise, and they had unprecedented numbers of referrals into the multi-agency safeguarding hub, I think for 2 consecutive weeks. That level has remained high, as I said, at periods of time when we'd expect to see a reduction. I mean, historically, in line with the academic year, when it was school holidays, we'd see the referral rates come right down. That hasn't been happening over the last couple of years. The demand has remained really high. In March alone of this year, we had 27 children going on to a child protection plan in that month, which is quite unusual for us. It was reflected by the same activity in Hampshire as well, so we weren't out of kilter with other authorities. We've really done some analysis and looked at some of the drivers behind what might be pushing those referrals up, and we think it's a culmination of different things. We think it's families really starting to feel the impacts of COVID, 2 pandemics, 3 lockdowns. We think it's really impacting families, poverty, rise in fuel, increased prices of food. We think those are some of the drivers. I think also, whenever we have national panel reviews following child deaths in the country, we often see a spike in referrals. Of course, we had the national reports for Arthur Labinjo Hughes and Star Hobson, around about the time when that really peaked in Q4. So we understand some of the drivers behind the increased rates. What we were hoping for is that would either plateau or start to come down. What we haven't seen is that that's happened. So we're continuing to be really challenged. I think what we've noticed, families relying more heavily on food banks and community pantries. You know, they're really struggling to maintain their daily lives. And I think we're really starting to see the impact of that now. Despite the increase in work and carrying the vacancies that I talked about earlier, our ability to complete our assessments of children that are referred into our service has remained consistently strong. So that means that children are being seen, they're being assessed, their needs are being considered, and next steps are being planned for those children. So that's really good, strong performance, and an indicator that we have to report to the government on as well. So children subject to child protection planning. Again, you can see around the end of the third lockdown, a spike in numbers again. They started to come back down, and then in March, they went back up again. So, and that seems to be the kind of spiky activity we're seeing every time something happens. We see that reflected in our referrals and the cases. I think one of the things we've noticed, and I think one of the other issues behind the rise in referrals, children are really struggling emotionally and mentally following the 3 lockdowns and the pandemic. Lots of uncertainty for them, and I think we're really seeing some quite complex families that we're working with. And one of the things we noted as well when we did a bit of analysis was actually lots of the families that were coming through the system weren't families that we've known previously. So they're new families, new problems coming back through, coming into the system. So it's helpful to have that context and that understanding around what's behind our referrals. Children in need, again, that trend line reflects the same as the child protection. It went up in Q4. As I said, that was around about the time of the increased fuel prices, the food price increases. The benefits and wages haven't kept abreast of those increases, and families are really, really struggling. I think one of the key things, to go back to something that Brian said actually about how integral the schools are in supporting families. During the lockdowns, the schools were excellent in terms of their community work that they did, taking food parcels out to families, making sure children were seen, and we worked really, really closely with the schools, formed a significant part of our safeguarding processes. Interestingly, our line of looked after children, although it looks like it's slightly increased in Q4, if you take out of those overall numbers, the 17 children that we were mandated to take who are unaccompanied asylum seekers, our numbers have remained fairly stable. So I think what we've noticed with our referrals is we're getting a lot of referrals in. We think there's a lot of anxiety across the partnership and in the community, and that's generating the high referrals. That's not necessarily equating to children coming into the system permanently, and we had a slight increase. We had an increase in child protection plans in March, but a lot of that work's not converting to child protection plans. So it's that lower level support. Caseloads for the social workers have increased, and how we measure that is we take the overall numbers and then we look at the average across each social work team. Because we're carrying vacancies, those caseload averages are higher. As I said, we've had some additional investment from the council to employ social workers. We've not managed to do that. We're relying fairly heavily on agency staff at the moment. And even now it's becoming hard to recruit agency staff because it's so competitive. There is a memorandum of cooperation for agency staff across the region, which includes 19 local authorities, and that makes sure that we're all working to the same agreement and that the prices aren't hiked up to, barter with each other, basically. It seems to be working. So we are doing a joint piece of work with adult social care because we felt that our marketing and recruitment strategy needs to be refreshed, reinvigorated. So there's a joint piece of work happening there. I know that Steve Crock has been working and speaking to the chief exec here. We're going to review the pay scales, and we've got a meeting coming up around that to see if we can make our pay scales more attractive, because we can't actually compete with some of the local authorities. And we think that might be having an impact. And we really need to, we want to really sell the uniqueness of the island and really make it an attractive place to work. So there's some work going on around that. So whilst all this work's going on, we do still have to quality assure everything we're doing to make sure that it's a really good standard. So we continue to undertake our case file audits every month to look at the standard of work. That's then benchmarked by senior managers in Hampshire, and we do that as a collaborative exercise. And we look at the quality of those audits, what we're learning from them, what we could improve as a result. So in Q4, we undertook 48 case file audits. We look at evidence of practitioner analysis. So we want social workers, when they're analysing their work, to be able to tell us, so what does that mean for us? What does that mean for that child? And we saw that in 90% of cases, there was evidence of practitioner analysis. We need to see that the assessments informed the intervention in the plan and improved outcomes for children. So that's what we look very closely at. We look at the importance of partnership work and multi-agency engagement in planning. You can't have a plan for a child without multi-agency buy-in. So it's a critical part of the auditing process. We look at case summaries. We look to make sure that there's really good evidence that managers have their eyes on the cases and they know what's happening for those children. And another important part of the work is the evidence of supervision. So those social workers have those opportunities to talk about those cases that are challenging, emotionally challenging and difficult sometimes. So that's a critical part of the work as well. I'll hand you off to Brian.
And just to kind of demonstrate the joined upness of the system, one of the things you also find when there are national child protection issues is that other organisations like Ofsted start to react to those as well. And we've had examples nationally where schools have ended up failing Ofsteds on safeguarding on the basis that they haven't referred sufficiently. Those messages then go around the head teacher circuit incredibly quickly, which of course ends up with more referrals coming in from schools as well. So I think there's a bit of settling down that needs to be done with schools, and probably a little bit of work around the threshold. You know, where is the threshold for referral? So it's the way that kind of whole system joins up there. A few stats around education inclusion. The first one, I reported it last time, you won't get another September guarantee figure obviously until it's been September next year. But that's the proportion of 16 and 17-year-olds who have had an offer of education, employment and training. And you'll see that we have really good stats on the island. 98.2% of young people get that offer, and that's higher than the national average, it's higher than the regional average. It's something we should be incredibly proud of. In the last quarter, one of the indicators I keep a very close eye on is the amount of education, health and care plans we produce within a 20-week period. It's a key indicator for us, that is. Although some parents say, I'd much rather you took 24 weeks and had a really high quality plan than you rushed it in the 20 weeks. So it's not always the killer stat when parents are concerned. The SEN team that assesses whether or not a child should have an education healthcare plan had a couple of people leave in January, and we had a month where we were a couple of members of staff down before new people got appointed. So we slipped in terms of timeliness at the start of the year. Those new members of staff are now in train, and we got 75% of the plans produced in time in April. I've just had the May figures and they're 82%. I've just seen the new national figures, they're 53%. So this is normally a team that performs well above the national average month after month after month. The other bit that we sometimes find we get slip in January, February is there's another stat we have to try and get to, which is all the year sixes, their application for secondary schools and their placement for secondary education has to be completed by the 15th of February. And we got 100% of those done by the 15th of February. And that to us felt even more important than hitting the 20-week indicator, because parents need to know where their kids are going in September. But we did 100% of those. And then the children with an EHCP moving on to post-16 education, they have to be undertaken by the 31st of March. And again, we got 100% of those done with parents informed as well. So kind of good performance, but we did have a dip at the beginning of the year. Next slide. You'll see the proportion of schools graded good or better by Ofsted. The end of last quarter was 78%. So that was up a couple of percentage points on the last quarter. That was St Francis Schools report. They got inspected, I think, in January, which reported into this quarter. So we've moved up again. I'm hoping at the end of next quarter to be able to report a further rise. Numbers of children being electively home educated, the way that those numbers were rising has slowed over the past year, and you'll see the stat there with 531 compared to 508 the previous year. Those numbers will decrease in July because all the year 11 come off those stats, obviously, because they're beyond statutory school age and they'll go down again then. So the numbers start off low at the start of the academic year and then build up until year 11 disappear off again. But that feels much more stable and static now. Again, it's performance that many local authorities would give their right arm for. Is we're in contact with about 80% of those electively home educated families, and actually the relationship by and large is good between families on the island that choose to electively home educate, and particularly Louise Tatton, who's our EHE officer. She does a really good job around that. I've got my fingers crossed on the permanent exclusions because they're looking good. So after 2 terms, we were on 5. And for the whole of the last academic year, we had 17. So if we can continue that trend, just please, for this term, it would mean that our permanent exclusions would be quite significantly down on the previous year, which I think is a good piece of work that we've done. The fixed term exclusions, you can see what the figure is there. That's up on where we were the previous year. That doesn't surprise me, and part of that, I think, possibly is explained by the reduction in the permanent exclusions. So rather than permanently exclude a child, what they've done is suspended a child for a fixed period of time. And I think that is a better outcome for the child because it does mean they're still included in the school community and still going to go back. Again, we've done some really detailed work with governing bodies and head teachers over that figures because I still would want it to come down from that. Since we've done that work, we are seeing a decline in some of the schools that historically had higher levels of suspension. So we are seeing an impact of that work, which will hopefully come through in the stats. And then finally, attainment. So it's not finally, attainment data. Obviously, we still haven't had any exams. The children have just been doing those. They're doing them at the moment. So we will have Key Stage 2 data in September, October time. We'll have some beginnings of GCSE outcomes as well, and A levels or the post-16 qualifications. Have I got a clue where those are going to land, given those kids have gone through 2 years of a pandemic? No, I haven't. Much of that's going to depend on the individual circumstances of each individual child. Some children have missed more school than others. Some schools have been more affected by staff absence than others. So I think, it'll be really interesting interpreting the results, and I hope you all don't put an incredible store on them when they come through a year to contextualise as putting my stuff in early, aren't I, before it and then finally, attendance stats have recently been produced for the last academic year. The DFE runs a year behind on attendance. They're trying to improve their system so we get better attendance stat figures come through. So they're doing a national trial at the moment where schools have volunteered to provide access to their management information system. So the DFE can extract straight from the management information system at school source. I think it's something like 10,000 schools are now on that system. I think it'll be rolled out to all schools eventually, so we'll get more real-time data. But you'll see there, our attendance rate was practically the same as the national rate during that year, better in primary than secondary. However, what I would say, and these stats weren't available when I wrote these slides, is you'll have seen in the media some stats about the autumn term of this academic year, where ministers are expressing concern about the levels of absenteeism during the autumn term, and the island is mirroring the national stats on those as well. And I think there are a whole wealth of reasons for that, but there are quite a large number of children that are persistently absent, i.e. they're missing more than 10% of their education. It's about 23, 24% of kids nationally. And the reason for that are multiple. Some are COVID related in that children have got anxiety and are kind of worried to come back, and schools are doing some terrific outreach work actually with families to try and coax and bring those children back in. We've also seen an increase in more wealthy families saying, we haven't had a holiday for the last 2 years, we'll pay a fine on top of the holiday and it'll still be cheaper. We're worried about the rising gas bills, electric bills, so we are going to take our holiday in term time. So we are seeing an increase in holidays being taken during term time. And if somebody goes for more than 10 days, those kids then appear on the PA stats. There's also something head teachers have described to me. As work patterns have changed and parents are spending more time at home, we're seeing a culture where some children are saying to the parents, I don't feel like going into school today, can I work from home? And parents perhaps agreeing to that. The culture has not set in the same place it was pre-COVID. And the heads I was talking with this morning saying, will it ever reset to where it was? So I think there's some really interesting stuff around attendance that we're going to have to look at probably over a 2-year period, actually, because it's cultural rather than a single answer bullet that will solve it all. But I am increasingly concerned at the levels of persistent absenteeism at the moment.
Thank you both. Any questions for Kim and Councillor Lee?
Thank you. Cheers, Kim. Thanks, Brian. Just around the fixed period exclusions, what's the trend there? And is that number, are they all unique exclusions, or are some of those the same student count?
Some of them are the same student counting more than once. Absolutely right.
And the trend over previous years, are we going up?
I think we were always going to expect to see more children this year because last year schools were closed for a period of time. So unsurprisingly, one of the things that secondary heads are telling me, and it rings true, is because the students have not been into school as much, some of the maturity levels and the kind of expected norms you would have in a school. I had a head this morning say to me, is some of the horseplay that goes on, particularly around boys, they don't know where the line is in the same way that they did pre-pandemic, and there's some teaching that needs to go back on. And some of that has led to incidents where people have got hurt and they've ended up with fixed period exclusion suspensions as well. Yeah.
And again, just following from that, is there, because it seems to me like a pretty high number of exclusions, right? Are there any alternative strategies that schools are thinking about in terms of trying to come away from exclusions? Because are they effective in what they do? I know they take kids out of school, but it's not really helping the kid, is it, in a sense?
Yeah, exactly that. And that's been the detailed piece of work. We've deliberately targeted the schools with the highest number of suspensions. So you work in inverse proportion to success, if you like. And that's the piece of work we've been doing, is giving those schools alternative strategies. Because for me, those children have missed enough school already. And if I'm going to be really blunt, as a consequence of poor behaviour, sending the child home to potentially go and play on their Xbox all day doesn't feel much of a punishment to me. Far better things that we could be doing with schools to correct behaviour.
Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chairman. Brian, may I ask about the 80% of home educated children, of their parents and that, going to the local authority? Are they going to the local authority for teaching techniques or what? And can you see that percentage rising? Thank you.
I think the whole terrain around this is going to change in the next period of time. So in the white paper, the government have made a commitment that all local authorities will have to have a register of the children who are electively home educated in their area. That's never been a legal requirement in the past. It's been down to parents to choose to tell a local authority. So the numbers we think on the island, we think we've got a really accurate view as to who's electively home educated because the island community will know each other. We suspect other local authorities' numbers are going to go up dramatically once it becomes law that people have to register, because I think large local authorities don't have that handle on the community like the island does. What the duty of the local authority is to assess the suitability of the home education that is taking place. At the moment, there's no definition of suitable education. So what we do is we do a reverse of that, and we assess whether we think the education is completely unsuitable. And it's pretty easy to determine when something is completely and utterly unsuitable. And in those occasions, those are the families we particularly work with to say, have you thought about joining an EAG group? Have you thought about taking advice from this? There's lots of support out there on social media and websites and so on. But ultimately, if the education is failing the children, they're not getting a decent education, we will issue an attendance order and work with the parents to get the children back into school.
Any further questions? No, I've got a couple.
Sorry, Richard, that's probably an item for a meeting once that law gets changed.
Well, that was one of the things is actually because I think speaking to people in the home education community, they're quite worried about some of the stuff in the white paper. And by and large, they are, and they just like to be left alone because they're good at contacting. So I think that is definitely worth. I think it might be on the work plan. I've just noticed actually in there. Kim, you're saying about recruiting. Oh, first of all, where would you say, in terms of referrals increasing, where could the council help and best direct the scarce resources we have to reduce referrals? Think, the free school meals issues, those sorts of things. What would work? Thank you. And the other is recruiting. What's the handbrake to recruiting to the Isle of Wight, and be as broad as you need to be? Because I think we might have a bigger problem than this, we have. I know from the NHS point of view, a real problem getting nurses and doctors and agency workers on is actual availability of accommodation. I don't know if you've come across that, not wanting to put words in your mouth at all. Brian, permanent exclusions, 5, it's good. How do managed moves reflect in that?
They don't. If however, what I would say is the number of managed moves between institutions has dropped quite considerably. It's quite rare for that to happen now. The other bit that's dropped, because most of our secondary schools reduced their plans, and we haven't got lots of spare places. We used to have a system whereby if there were behavioural issues around a child, sometimes parents would seek to move them to another school. That's more difficult to do now that the schools are more full. So what we're having to do is work through the issues in the school they're in, which I think long term is probably better for the child, because they do need to face up to how they can manage their own behaviours rather than starting afresh somewhere else. Not always the best solution.
It was based on, I know, 2 managed moves, and I just wondered how that worked, because I think parents still feel the same distress as a child being excluded. It was really, I do understand what you're saying. Do we keep the stats for managed moves at all, or is it difficult?
I'll check and let you know. Guess we would only know if schools notified us. I'm not sure there's a statutory duty on them, but let me check and I'll come back to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And then the last one was just in terms of temporary exclusions, which I think you're right to put the link to reduction in permanent exclusions, is compared to a similar size authority. That number, is it similar, smaller?
I haven't seen the stats yet for other local authorities for this year, and historically we've always been slightly above the national rate of suspensions. I'm picking up a lot of noise from my assistant director colleagues that their fixed exclusions, they're now called suspensions, but changed the language, gone back 20 years, that they're increasing in other local authorities as well. The permanence is interesting because all my AD colleagues are telling me their numbers are going up. For us to be bucking that trend and to be coming down, I think feels quite remarkable actually, but let's see where we end up the year. Don't want to tempt fate too quickly.
I suppose one question would then be, as long as we're entirely confident that is a true reduction in permanent exclusions, then that's good. And that was my concern about the managed moves, if somehow we're massaging the figure. But thank you for that. Any further questions? No, marvellous. So moving on to item 10, the work plan. Hopefully you'll give us a quick glance. It's pretty full all the way up until September 23. So I'm not going to worry too much about finding something to put on the work plan for September 23. I do notice that the green paper and the white paper are tabled in for September. So I'll come back to your point, Brian. We'll discuss about elective home education in there, I would have thought. Anything anybody's noted or wants to add or change? Councillor Lever.
It was just a question on the progress and actions. There was something in June, the young carers support, that's still to be actioned, and I don't think that's on the. Does that need to be on the work plan going forward? I can't see it. I might have just missed it.
Yes, it does. We need to get it on the right date. Thank you for that, Joe. Anything else? Moving on to members' questions. Any questions from members? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Councillor Andre. I'm sure she was expecting this question. You may or may not be aware that there has not been an uplift in pupil numbers for Chillerton and Rookley schools since your announcement to keep it open. As of this morning, it still stands at 15 for September. At the 10th of May corporate scrutiny meeting, when you were asked about the viability of keeping the school open, you said the decision was looking at whether a model could be created that would work for smaller rural schools, and that you are confident that that model existed. So my question is, can you update me as to whether or not you've found that model, what it looks like for both Chillerton and Rookley and other island schools that are facing similar issues, excuse me, so I'm hay fevery, of falling numbers and increasing deficits? What form would the support take, please?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rose. I think there's really 2 parts to your question there. The first one, in terms of Chiltern and Rookley, let me be very, very clear. The decision has been made to keep the school open. In terms of the numbers, as I'm sure you'll also be aware, the date for submission for September had already passed, I think, by the time the decision to keep the school open was made. So in terms of the usual statutory date, that date had already passed. But it's still, the decision's been made to keep it open, so it is still an option for parents to apply for September. So I'd just like to make that very, very clear.
Thank you. I did understand that, but so far it doesn't look as if people are taking up that option. That was the point I was making.
Well, obviously that's the decision to keep it open gives that option to parents, but as we know, school placement is through parental choice. So the actual choice now rests with the parents if they wanted to obviously apply for a place there. In terms of the model moving forward, as I have said on many occasions, and I will reiterate, I will refer you to the work plan where the it's all tied in, obviously, with you mentioned about the reduction in PAN numbers. So it's all tied in with the school place planning. And it is not just about Chiltern and Rookley, I would stress. It's about defining a model that works for smaller rural island schools. And a report is coming back to this committee at the meeting on the 1st of September.
Okay, thank you for that. May I follow that up, please, Chair? Okay, thank you. I'm obviously concerned about Chiltern because it's in my ward, but the question was referring to all of the schools. So at the moment, we can't go back to the school and say, yes, this is the support that you can be offered. I'm just also slightly concerned that you have said you would support the school, but you don't appear to have actually been in and spoken to the head teacher or the governors, which I just find slightly disappointing.
I'll come in and then Brian, you can come in. You may not be aware, I know you're a relatively new councillor, Councillor Ellis, but my role as cabinet member is strategic. I am in constant conversation with my team, who I think Brian's alluded to earlier, and I'm sure he'll add to in a moment. At this stage, it would not be appropriate for me as the strategic cabinet member to be communicating directly with the head and the governors, but there will come a point where I will naturally engage with them. It's for officers from an operational perspective, and I can reassure you that Brian and his team have been extremely supportive and proactive of both the head and the chair of governors of Chiltern and Rookley, but I'll pass Brian to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, the support the school needs at the moment really is around operation, Councillor Ellis. So as soon as the decision was taken by Cabinet, I spent the whole afternoon with Mark Snow and his team making sure that we got arrangements in place for teaching the children to the best of our ability from September. The following week, I went out and met the whole governing body so that we had a kind of governance plan around that as well. I think it's true to say Mark and myself have corresponded a few times since then, and obviously the work of the school improvement team, particularly Jane Wilson, who's one of our primary phase advisors, she's been working incredibly closely with Mark, because the focus operationally is making sure that no matter what the number of children on roll, is that they get really high quality education. You'd expect me to say that as the lead education professional, and that's kind of what we've been focusing on. In terms of models around small primary schools, I mean, I guess the bits we're really looking at is, yes, there's the school place planning strategy, but the other bit that's changed slightly is the white paper around maths and whether that affords opportunities for schools to come together in maths with greater cross-subsidisation of cost. There are some pros and cons around that. And when I come and talk about the white paper in September, I'll unpick all those threads for members so you can see what the kind of pros and cons are in that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Outlaw.
Yeah, just a bit of clarification, if you don't mind, in relation to the school place planning coming back to this committee in September. Certainly the description and the background in our work plan says to consider the latest projections. But from what you've said, Councillor Andre, can we be clear that there will be a plan to address the place planning on the Isle of Wight for our committee to consider?
We are currently, as Brian said, the white paper very much comes into this. We are working up currently proposals for strategic place planning, which will come back to this committee. Brian, do you want to add to that?
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
There will be a plan that's brought to the September committee, which will have all the stats of the children that are projected to be in the system in each school planning area for numbers, and the actions we feel we need to take as a local authority to ensure the number of places and the number of the children are more equal than they currently will be. So yes, there will be a plan.
Sorry, Chair, if I may, part of that is we have surplus places, but they're not necessarily in the right areas. So you will get more detail on that. As Brian alluded to, there are the strategic place planning for the island. The island is divided into areas. And so we drill down into the detail of those areas as to what places are needed and where the spaces are. So you will get that detailed information in September.
Thank you. I have got one question, Councillor Andrew. I would first time I asked this question of Councillor Andrew was on the phone after the school free school meals thing was announced. I was very agitated, so I thought it's only fair I ask it in an unagitated way. If Councillor Andrew, you can take us through what time I described you as unnecessary distress caused for far too many families that thought the free school meal vouchers scheme wasn't going to happen. How did we get to that stage where we didn't know, and what have we learnt to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Okay, thank you for that, Chair. I'm very happy to give some more detail on that. I think going back, when the Connect for Communities funding was first introduced, it had a certain criteria. It was, let's be clear, this was funding that came directly from government that was to be distributed by the Isle of Wight Council. And I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to officers who did an absolutely sterling job. I think we were one of the best authorities in actually distributing those, not only distributing those funds, but making sure that those funds had the greatest impact. So initially we were able to provide those vouchers. Right from the get-go, we were told that it was a short-term measure. Shortly before the funding was, the next round might have come. Each time we were given very short notice. Initially, it was extended. But I must stress that each fund had an end date by which the funds had to be distributed. And we didn't know until basically that deadline whether or not we were going to get more funding. Prior to the last half term, we sent out a letter to schools because 2 weeks before that, because at that point we thought there would be no more funding. But not only that, but there was other funding whereby the criteria actually changed. So because the notice was so short, and I do take seriously the commitments that I make, it was possible only on a one-off basis to actually secure funding from another one-off stream. to actually provide what we termed as a sort of emergency food voucher scheme because of the short notice and because we knew that parents would be relying on that. I must stress at this point that there is no further funding for those schemes for summer for the food vouchers. However, there is a new scheme coming in, but as I say, the criteria has changed. The household support fund, we now have to give a minimum of a third to pensioners. And obviously that has had an impact on the other areas that we can actually fund. So although there won't be further funding for summer, of course, we do still have our holiday activities and food schemes, which are specifically aimed at those children that are on free school meals so that they can still be provided with a hot meal. And we have providers, will shortly be releasing some details of our providers both for the summer holidays, and we've also secured providers for the Christmas holidays as well. So we do have, I would stress, we do still have our holiday activities and food scheme. There will be vouchers on the new scheme. We are waiting for the details. And this is how things have been all along. But the existing scheme of food vouchers will not be happening. In addition, there are other, the letter that we actually sent out to the schools did detail a range of other measures that are consistently in place, such as the Help Through Crisis Fund, the Council's own Hardship Fund. Poverty, both childhood poverty and what we're seeing now, poverty within families, is our top priority as an administration, and we will be putting everything that we can into place to actually address that. Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, it does sound like government gave and then government take away, but what could we say we've learned as a council to better communicate and stop families being scared to death and all things that happened that time?
I think hindsight's a wonderful thing. I think perhaps that communication that it was a short-term measure, so perhaps to be clearer that when these schemes come into play, to actually stress more the duration. As I said earlier, there were clear deadlines that we were given by which the funding had to be distributed. And whilst we were very effective at distributing that funding within those timescales, perhaps we didn't stress firmly enough that that was a set fund, and that there was no guarantee from government that it would continue, or indeed, as we've seen now, that it would continue in the same form with the same criteria.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Evans.
Thank you. This is just to help my understanding, because I'm not clear on it. The funding that came through when we were getting funding from the government, was that a set amount and all of it? How did we get it? How did you qualify for it? And did all of it go a pot of money? Was the whole pot of money spent, or I don't know, how did it work?
As a local authority, we actually received a set amount with a set of criteria as to how that money could be distributed. The only autonomy, if you like, as a local authority that we had over that was how much we actually allocated to each period, if you like. That was the initial funding that we actually got. But I think where the confusion has come out is that obviously government have recognised that the situation is deteriorating, and the confusion now is that there are different funds with different names that have different criteria. I hope that clarifies it.
It does, thank you.
But as I say, we were very successful in utilising that funding where it would have the greatest impact.
Anything else from anyone, or do we wish everyone a farewell on a Thursday evening that looks a bit damp? Thank you all. Thank you those of you who have travelled over as usual. Thank you for everybody else for your attendance. Have a safe and peaceful weekend.